I was sold to an Arab prince as a wife, but on our wedding night he did something unimaginable. I never imagined that my life would one day be traded like a possession. My name is Layla, and I grew up in a forgotten town where dreams died young and hope was a luxury no one could afford. When my mother fell gravely ill, my stepfather's desperation turned to greed. He told me it was for our family's survival, but I knew the truth. He sold me to a wealthy Arab prince, a man I had never met, for a sum of money that could only buy his conscience a little silence. The night they came for me, I remember the hum of expensive engines as 3 black cars stopped outside our small house. Men in suits stepped out, their expressions cold and businesslike. A woman in silk smiled at me and said, "Don't be afraid, you're going to live like a queen now." Her words sounded sweet, but inside me, fear screamed louder than her promises. I was taken across borders, through deserts that glowed like gold under the setting sun, until we reached a palace that seemed carved out of light itself. Marble floors, chandeliers that looked like stars, and walls lined with gold. It should have felt like a dream, but to me, it felt like a cage, too beautiful to escape. That night, they dressed me in a bridal gown made of pearls and silk. The air smelled of roses and incense, but my hands trembled as they placed heavy jewelry around my neck, pieces that glittered but suffocated me. The palace came alive with music and celebration. Strangers danced, laughed, toasted to my fate, while I sat silent, staring at the man I was told to call my husband, Prince Khalid. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his eyes carried something I couldn't name. They weren't cruel, yet they were distant, filled with shadows of battles he never spoke about. He didn't touch me, didn't even smile. When the ceremony ended, the doors closed behind us, and the world went quiet except for the pounding of my heart. I stood there, bracing myself for what I thought was coming, the moment every terrified bride fears when she knows she has no choice. But instead, he turned away, removed his royal robe, and said in a quiet voice, "You don't have to be afraid of me." I didn't understand. He looked at me, not with lust, but with guilt. Then, to my shock, he knelt and whispered, "I'm sorry this happened to you." I froze. He poured me a glass of water, his hands trembling more than mine. "You're safe here," he said softly. "I'll never hurt you." Those words didn't fit the image of a prince who had just bought a wife. I lay awake all night, unable to believe what I'd witnessed. The next morning, when I opened my eyes, he was gone. On the bedside table lay a folded note. 4 words were written in neat Arabic script, "Trust no one here." And in that moment, I realized my story had only just begun. When the heavy golden doors closed behind us, I felt as though the air itself had vanished. The laughter from the wedding hall faded into a suffocating silence, leaving only the echo of my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I stood still, trembling, afraid to breathe. I had been sold, traded like a possession, and now I was alone in a vast chamber with a man who was supposed to be my husband, Prince Khalid. My palms were cold, and I braced myself for the moment I'd been dreading, but it never came. Khalid didn't approach me. Instead, he walked past, removed his royal robe, and sat quietly near the edge of the bed. I waited, confused, terrified. Then he turned to me, his voice low and steady, and said, "You don't have to be afraid of me." I blinked, not understanding his words. He looked at me, not as a man who had purchased a bride, but as someone burdened by something deeper. Slowly, he stood, walked closer, and to my disbelief, he knelt before me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted this." "None of it." His voice cracked slightly as he explained that this marriage was not his choice but his father's command. The king, a man known for his power and ruthlessness, demanded his son follow the old traditions where women were objects of alliance and property. Khalid told me he hated every part of it, that he despised seeing fear in my eyes. He poured a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly as he handed it to me. "You owe me nothing," he said quietly. "You are not my slave. You're free to walk anywhere you wish within these walls." For a moment, I thought he was mocking me. The words sounded too kind, too impossible. But when I met his eyes, I saw something unexpected. Sincerity. There was pain behind his calmness, guilt behind his silence. It was as if he carried a secret far heavier than either of us could bear. The rest of the night passed in strange stillness. I sat on the edge of the bed, my wedding dress still shimmering under the dim lantern light, while Khalid spread a blanket on the floor. "I'll sleep here," he said simply. "You deserve peace, not fear." He lay down, his back turned, leaving me staring at the ceiling, wondering who this man truly was. The palace was silent, but my mind was loud, filled with questions that refused to rest. Why did he buy me if he didn't want a wife? Why did his voice sound like someone trying to save rather than own? When the first rays of dawn slipped through the curtains, I realized I hadn't slept at all. Khalid was gone. The spot where he'd slept was empty, the blanket folded neatly. On the bedside table lay a folded note written in delicate Arabic calligraphy. My heart thumped as I unfolded it. The message was brief, only 4 words, but they chilled me to the bone. "Trust no one here." I stared at the note, feeling the weight of it press down on my chest. It was not just a warning. It was a promise that my nightmare had only begun. Days slowly melted into weeks, and life inside the Golden Palace became a silent prison. The walls were beautiful but hollow, echoing whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Servants bowed without meeting my eyes, and guards lingered longer than necessary in every hallway I passed. I could feel it. Something dark hid beneath the surface of all this splendor. At night, I heard footsteps where there shouldn't have been any, muffled voices behind locked doors, and faint sobs carried by the desert wind. One afternoon, while wandering through the eastern wing, I stumbled upon a door that looked slightly different. Older, scratched, as if someone had tried to open it before. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. The handle was locked, but a fallen key glimmered near the edge of a carpet. My curiosity overcame my fear. I turned the key slowly until the door creaked open, revealing a cold, dimly lit room. Inside were metal cabinets, documents stacked in boxes, and photographs pinned on a board. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Women's faces, names, passports, all marked with red stamps that read, "Disappeared." My blood turned to ice. There were dozens of them. My hands trembled as I flipped through the files, recognizing the same agency name that had arranged my own marriage. That was when the door behind me opened, and Khalid stood there, silent. For a heartbeat, I thought he would be furious, but his eyes only carried sadness. "Now you know," he said quietly, stepping closer. "This is what I've been trying to stop." My voice shook as I asked what all of this meant. Khalid looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "My father," he said, "has turned our kingdom's traditions into a business. Every woman brought here was sold under the name of marriage, then vanished. I've been collecting evidence, waiting for the right time to expose him. You weren't meant to be part of this, but I had to protect you. That's why I married you myself." The truth hit me like a storm. The man I thought had bought me was actually the only person keeping me alive. My chest tightened with fear and gratitude all at once. "What happens now?" I asked in a whisper. He handed me a small leather bag. Inside were cash, a passport with a different name, and a small phone. "If I don't return by morning," he said, his voice calm but his eyes heavy with dread, "take this and go to the southern border. Don't tell anyone, don't wait for me, just run." My hands shook as I held the bag, unable to speak. That night I didn't sleep. The silence of the palace felt like the calm before a storm. When dawn came, the air smelled of smoke. I rushed to the window and saw black clouds rising from the west wing. The palace was burning, and somewhere in that fire my fate and Khalid's were about to change forever. Flames roared through the palace like a living monster, swallowing gold and marble in a storm of fire and smoke. I ran barefoot through the corridors, clutching the small leather bag Khalid had given me, my lungs burning with every breath. Shouts echoed from every direction, guards screaming orders, alarms blaring, glass shattering. The once beautiful palace that had been my cage was now collapsing around me. I could barely see through the smoke, but I followed the sound of gunfire toward the main gate. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might stop. Every step I took felt like running through a nightmare I could never wake up from. Then, through the chaos, headlights cut through the darkness. A black car screeched to a halt in front of me. The driver's door burst open and Khalid stumbled out, blood staining his white shirt. "Get in!" he shouted, wincing from the wound on his arm. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the passenger seat and he hit the accelerator, tires screaming as we tore through the burning gates and into the desert night. The palace shrank behind us, just a silhouette of flames under the moonlight. The air smelled of smoke and sand, and for the first time in months I felt the rush of open freedom. But our escape wasn't over. In the rearview mirror I saw lights approaching, several vehicles moving fast. "They're following us," I whispered. Khalid nodded, his jaw tight. "My father's men. They'll do anything to keep this secret buried." The car rattled across the rocky dunes, dust rising around us like a storm. I could see the fear in his eyes, but also something stronger, determination. Then, in the distance, a low hum filled the air. I looked up and saw it. Helicopters cutting across the sky. Their spotlights swept across the desert, growing brighter, closer. "Who are they?" I asked. Khalid managed a faint smile through his exhaustion. "Interpol," he said. "I called them last week. I knew this day would come." Moments later, the desert erupted into chaos. The convoy chasing us was surrounded by armored trucks and flashing lights. Agents shouted orders in multiple languages as gunfire cracked through the night. I watched in shock as Khalid's father was dragged out of one of the vehicles, his face twisted in fury and disbelief. It was over. The trafficking network, the lies, the kingdom built on women's suffering, all burned away with the palace behind us. Days later, I woke up in a hospital room in a nearby city. Khalid was sitting beside my bed, his arm bandaged, his crown gone. He looked at me softly and said, "I've given up everything. The title, the power. I just want peace." He paused, his eyes wet with tears. "No woman should ever be bought again." I reached for his hand and whispered, "Then let me be the first woman you choose freely." He smiled, and for the first time, I saw not a prince, but a man, human, broken, and kind. In that moment, I realized I was never truly sold. I had been rescued, found, and given back my voice. Sometimes the unimaginable isn't cruelty, it's redemption disguised as love.